first time I saw my own face attached to a life that was not mine, I did not feel anger. I felt displacement, as if I had briefly stepped outside my body and watched someone else inhabit it more convincingly than I ever had. It was close to midnight in Seattle, and the rain was moving in long, slanted lines across the glass walls of my apartment. From the 23rd floor, the city looked distant and abstract, reduced to reflections of white headlights and red brake lights dissolving into wet pavement. I had come home from work exhausted but restless, poured a glass of wine I did not particularly want, and opened my phone with the mechanical reflex of someone postponing sleep. That is when I saw her. The profile photo was mine, cropped from a professional headshot on my firm's website, but the expression seemed subtly altered by context. In the small circular frame, my smile looked more assured, almost triumphant. The name beneath it was my own. The bio described a version of my career that felt like an edited manuscript in which hesitation had been removed and ambition allowed to bloom unchecked. Principal architect, sustainable urban design. Speaker, mentor, Seattle. I am an architect. I do specialize in sustainable urban design, but I was not a principal, and I had never delivered keynote speeches overlooking a skyline while photographers captured my silhouette against the fading light. Yet there were photographs of exactly that. I scrolled with a slow, nauseated focus, half expecting the page to correct itself, the way a dream dissolves when you look too closely. Instead, the posts multiplied. A gala at the Museum of History and Industry. A panel discussion at a Pacific Northwest Resilience Summit. A glossy magazine spread with a caption quoting me about the moral necessity of building housing that could survive the next 50 years. The captions were written in my cadence, measured, earnest, slightly defensive. They used phrases I had said in meetings, the kind of language that felt safe inside a conference room because it was buffered by professionalism. But the effect on social media was different. Online, those words looked bold. Online, I looked bold. My name is Elena Markovic. I am 38 years old, and until last year, I believed that identity was something cumulative, shaped gradually through effort and restraint. I thought it could not be convincingly replicated without the labor that formed it. I underestimated how much of identity exists only on the surface. Seattle is a city that rewards reinvention. Old warehouses become luxury lofts. Modest startups swell into empires of glass and steel. People arrive with ambition and shed earlier versions of themselves without apology. I moved here a decade ago with a degree, a portfolio, and a careful determination not to overreach. I wanted respect more than visibility, stability more than spectacle. What I built was credible, though never dazzling. What he built was dazzling, though never earned. I did not sleep that night. I sat on my couch with the rain ticking at the windows like fingernails and watched the life he had curated from mine. The more I studied it, the more I understood the cruelty of its precision. He was not mocking me with something absurd. He was not wearing my identity as a costume. He was using it the way an architect uses an existing building, keeping the foundation, changing the facade, adding floors until the original seems small by comparison. Around 3 a.m, when the wine had warmed my stomach without loosening the knot behind my ribs, I saw a post tagged at a restaurant I had been to last month. The photo showed a table set for 2, a candle, a plate of oysters, 2 glasses of white wine. The caption read, "Celebrating the win. You don't get what you deserve. You get what you negotiate." The phrase snagged my mind because it was something my former partner had once said to me during a breakup that still felt like a bruise. I had repeated it to a friend over dinner not long ago, half joking, half bitter. It was not something I had ever posted online. That was the moment the fear became physical. It moved into my body and took up residence there, a low-grade illness that made my hands cold and my thoughts quick. 2 days later, I found his real name. Ryan Caldwell. His online presence was immaculate, curated with the ease of someone who understood that perception often outruns verification. His LinkedIn described him as an investor focused on mission-driven technology. He followed my firm, my colleagues, my university, even the nonprofit boards I occasionally supported. There were photographs of him with people whose names carried weight in Seattle's private rooms. Founders, philanthropists, one local council member who always seemed to appear in the background of good news. It would have been easier if he had looked sleazy, desperate, obviously fake. Instead, he looked inevitable. I began comparing timestamps. My own posts were infrequent, mostly professional updates, occasional photos of a hike or a view of the Sound. His posts, however, tracked my work in a way that felt like an echo, amplified by a canyon. When I posted about completing a waterfront housing proposal, he described leading a transformative waterfront redevelopment initiative. When I shared an article about equity in architecture, he wrote about mentoring emerging female designers in a male-dominated industry. His language echoed my opinions, yet carried a confidence I rarely displayed publicly. At first, I told myself it was coincidence. Seattle is not a large city in the way people imagine large cities. Industries overlap. People repeat the same phrases. Then I found a post that referenced a project name that had never been public. A code name we used internally while negotiating with a client who feared premature press. My stomach tightened in a way that made me lean over the sink. I had never written that name anywhere outside the firm. I did not feel followed in the conventional sense. There were no footsteps echoing behind me on late walks home, no unfamiliar cars idling near my building. Instead, I felt observed at the level of thought, as though the interior architecture of my ambitions had been mapped without my consent. The first truly destabilizing moment arrived on a gray Tuesday afternoon. Our firm received an email from a developer in San Francisco congratulating principal architect Elena Markovich on a keynote speech delivered at a sustainability summit the previous week. The email expressed enthusiasm about collaborating on future projects and referenced specific remarks I had made about resilient coastal infrastructure. I had not left Seattle that week. My assistant forwarded the message with a polite note. "Did you go to SF and forget to tell us?" The smiley face felt like a needle. I replied immediately, too quickly, with more punctuation than the situation deserved, insisting it was not me, that there must be confusion. Minutes later, my managing partner, Graham, called me into his office. His desk was always too clean, the kind of clean that suggests not discipline, but distance. He closed the door. "Elena," he said, carefully neutral. "Are you aware of any reason someone would believe you spoke at a conference in San Francisco?" "No," I said, and heard how defensive it sounded. "I didn't." He studied me with the polite skepticism of someone trained to weigh statements. "They sent a program," he continued. "Your name is on it. Your headshot." My mouth felt dry. "My headshot is on our website." "We'll address that," he said, which was the kind of phrase that sounds supportive until you realize it contains no commitment. When I contacted the conference organizers, their confusion mirrored my own disbelief. They insisted that I had been present, that I had participated in private sponsor meetings, that I had spoken with fluency and authority. They even sent footage. The woman on stage resembled me closely enough to deceive an audience familiar only with a headshot. She carried herself with the same measured posture. Her hair was the same shade, her gestures restrained but purposeful. Yet her features were not mine. The differences were subtle but undeniable to anyone who truly knew me. Watching her felt like watching a stranger deliver a speech with my voice removed, leaving only the outline of my identity. I replayed the clip until it began to feel like evidence against myself. When I filed a police report, the officer's response was procedural and restrained. No financial theft had occurred, no bank accounts had been compromised. The damage was classified as reputational and therefore complex. I left the station with paperwork that felt inadequate against the erosion unfolding around me. Reputational, as if reputation were not the scaffolding that holds a career upright. For several days afterward, I moved through Seattle with the sensation that I was living slightly behind my own life, as if he had stepped ahead of me on a path I had been walking for years and was now waving at people from my destination. I began researching him with a focus that bordered on obsession. His building in Belltown looked like every other new luxury high-rise. Glass, steel, a lobby that smelled faintly of citrus and money. I did not go inside. I sat in my car a block away on a wet Thursday evening and watched the revolving doors swallow people in coats that cost more than my monthly grocery bill. I told myself I was gathering information, but what I was really doing was trying to make him real enough to hate. My friend Sasha, who works in cybersecurity for a medical startup, agreed to meet me at a coffee shop near South Lake Union. The place smelled like espresso and damp wool. Laptops glowed at every table like a colony of small altars. "Okay," she said after I showed her the account. "This is not amateur. The images are curated. The tags are strategic. He's trying to build authority." "Can you find out where he is?" I asked. Sasha looked at me for a long moment. "Elena, if you're asking me to hack him—" "No," I said quickly, embarrassed by the desperation in my voice. "I just want something. Proof. A pattern." She sighed and took my phone again, scrolling with a careful, clinical expression. "He's using photos from events. Some of these are likely scraped from photographers' galleries, but this one—" She tapped on a picture of me with a group of architects at a charity auction. "This was taken at a place where phones aren't allowed, which means it came from someone with access." "Access to me?" I asked. "Or access to the same rooms you're in." That possibility landed like a weight. Over the next week, I grew paranoid about my own habits. I stopped talking freely at networking events. I began holding my phone face down on tables, as if someone might read my thoughts through it. I avoided mentioning projects by name, even to friends. It did not stop him. If anything, his posts grew smoother, as though my silence challenged him to be more inventive. Then an email arrived in my inbox from an address that looked official, using the domain of a well-known architecture magazine. The subject line read, "Feature request, Elena Markovich." My hands trembled slightly as I opened it. The message congratulated me on my recent keynote, praised my thought leadership, and asked whether I would be willing to contribute an essay about sustainable housing for an upcoming issue. The editor included flattering references to my past interviews. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Part of me, the small, hidden part that had spent years feeling overlooked, felt a sick rush of exhilaration. This was what I wanted. This was what I had told myself I was too busy, too modest, too sensible to pursue. It was like being offered a mirror that reflected a better face. Then the shame hit. It rolled in like cold water. I forwarded the email to Sasha. She replied, "Fake. Domain spoofing." I did not tell anyone at the firm about that email. I told myself it was because it would create more confusion, more suspicion. But the truth was uglier. I did not want them to know someone out there believed I could be that woman. I wanted to keep that possibility private, even if it had been offered to the wrong person. That is how control begins, I learned later. Not with obvious coercion, but with the quiet seduction of being seen. I should have pursued legal remedies immediately and allowed professionals to handle the matter discreetly. Instead, driven by a need for direct answers, I sent him a message from a private account. "We need to talk." His reply came within minutes. "I was expecting you." We agreed to meet in Pioneer Square at a bar whose dim lighting offered anonymity without isolation. The place was narrow and warm, with brick walls and a low ceiling that made voices sound closer than they were. Outside, the rain slicked the sidewalks and made the city smell like wet stone. When he entered, I felt a disorienting familiarity, as though I were encountering an alternate timeline embodied in human form. He was composed, neither flamboyant nor overtly charismatic. Early 40s, clean haircut, a coat that was expensive without being loud. He moved like a man who had spent years learning how to take up space without seeming to demand it. He smiled as if greeting an old colleague. "Elena," he said warmly, as though the name belonged naturally in his mouth. "You're using my identity," I said, and hated that my voice shook. "I'm expanding it," he replied. The calmness of his tone made my anger feel childish. It was as if he had already decided that my emotional response was a predictable variable. "I can report you," I said. "I already filed a report." "You can," he agreed, and then, with a slight tilt of his head, added, "But you know how that will go. No money stolen, no broken locks. Just confusion." My throat tightened. "Why are you doing this?" He did not answer immediately. He took in the room, the bartender wiping down the counter, the couple murmuring in the corner, the dim light catching on my glass. Then he looked back at me with a steadiness that felt intimate and invasive at once. "Because you don't take what you want," he said. "You wait for permission." I stared at him. "You don't know me." "I know the version you show," he corrected. "And I know the version you hide. The one that wants credit. The one that wants power, but keeps pretending she doesn't." My skin prickled. "Stop." "I'm not your enemy," he said softly, as if offering comfort. "I'm your proof." The sentence disturbed me because it was crafted to land in the tender places. He was not trying to frighten me with threats. He was trying to destabilize me with recognition. "I didn't give you permission," I said. "You gave me material," he replied. "That's different." I left the bar shaking, not because I feared immediate harm, but because I sensed he had stepped into my inner life and rearranged it. Walking back through the wet streets, I felt as though every reflective surface, a puddle, a window, the dark glass of a parked car, might show me the woman he had created. The next escalation was not dramatic. It was administrative, which made it more real. A developer emailed my firm claiming that I had already committed to a competing project. Attached was a PDF that looked legitimate, a letter of intent, my name printed cleanly at the bottom, above a digital signature that resembled mine enough to pass at a glance. I had never seen the document before. Graham called me into his office again. This time, his smile was thinner. "We're in a position," he said, "where we have to reassure clients." "I didn't sign that," I insisted. "I believe you," he said. But the way he said it suggested that belief was conditional. "Still, it's happening under your name." "I'm being impersonated," I said, and heard how absurd it sounded as a defense for professional chaos. He leaned back in his chair. "Elena, is there anything in your personal life that could be causing this? Any dispute?" The question made me feel dirty, as if he was asking whether I had provoked it by being careless with my relationships. I hired an attorney that week, a woman named Nadine, who specialized in defamation and digital impersonation. Her office was downtown, in a building that smelled like polished wood and old paper, an environment designed to make you feel small enough to listen. "This is more common than people think," she said, after reviewing my screenshots and the conference footage. "But the physical impersonation part is unusual. It suggests resources, planning, possibly a network." "A network?" I repeated. "Photographers, event access, people who can vouch for him, or someone who looks like you." My stomach turned. "Can we stop it?" "We can try," she said honestly. "We can send cease and desist letters, file injunctions, pursue identity theft claims. But if he's sophisticated, he'll pivot. These people thrive on the lag between your reality and his narrative." The phrase stayed with me. The lag between your reality and his narrative. Nadine's letters went out. Social media platforms were contacted. Conference organizers were notified. For a few days, the account went dark. I slept slightly better. Then it returned. New handle, same photos, better bio, more followers. This time, he posted a story from inside an event I had planned to attend that evening. The camera panned over a room I recognized instantly. The gallery space, the arrangement of chairs, the projection screen. My name was on the program. I stood in my apartment staring at the story, my heart pounding as though I had been locked out of my own life. The event was meant to be a small panel, nothing major. But it mattered to me because I had agreed to it reluctantly, telling myself I needed to start saying yes. And now, he was there, wearing my yes like a trophy. I did not go. I made up an excuse and told the organizer I was sick. The lie tasted bitter. But worse was the feeling of surrender, of being outmaneuvered by someone who could move freely through my schedule while I became cautious inside it. A week later, my firm's HR department requested a meeting to discuss online presence and professional reputation. The meeting was polite, framed as support. Still, sitting in that sterile conference room with framed posters about values on the wall, I felt as though I was being evaluated for damage I had not caused. "We just want to make sure you're safe," the HR director said, her voice gentle. "And that there's nothing compromising." Compromising. The word implied fault. Afterward, I went to the restroom and locked myself into a stall, breathing through the sudden urge to cry. The humiliation was not just that someone had stolen my name, but that the theft made others look at me as if I had been careless with it. That was when I understood the deeper goal. He was not merely collecting attention. He was undermining my credibility by turning my identity into something disputable. The second twist came quietly. Through paperwork, Nadine's investigator pulled archived records and found that Ryan Caldwell had once applied to my firm years earlier under a different name, Daniel Kovacs. The name meant nothing to me at first, but when Nadine showed me the scanned portfolio, my breath caught. The style was not identical to mine, but it carried the same vocabulary: public courtyards, passive ventilation, community-centered layouts, an obsession with how light moved through shared space. It was as if someone had studied the same references I had studied, internalized the same teacher's critiques. He interviewed twice, Nadine said. Then he was rejected. I asked HR for the archived interview notes. It took some persuasion, but eventually they sent a PDF. The notes described him as intelligent, intense, overconfident, and, one comment written in a blunt hand, oddly fixated on Elena's projects. I felt a cold line move down my spine. 8 years ago, I had been promoted from junior designer to project lead on a waterfront proposal after presenting an innovative drainage plan that impressed the partners. That promotion had been modest in the grand scheme of the firm, but for me, it had been a turning point. Proof that I belonged. Now I wondered what else had been happening around me then. Whether he had been watching, even before I knew his name. I confronted him again, this time not in a bar, but in the bright, echoing lobby of his building where the cameras were obvious and the doorman stood nearby like a witness. "You applied to my firm," I said. He did not look surprised. "I did." "You were rejected." "Yes." "And you decided to become me." He smiled faintly, as though I had finally understood the plot. "No," he said. "I decided to become who you were afraid to be." The sentence landed with nauseating accuracy. He leaned closer, not invading my space, but using proximity as pressure. "You think this is about stealing," he said quietly. "But it's about selection. You were selected." You can call that an insult if you want, but it isn't. Most people aren't worth replicating. I wanted to slap him. I wanted to scream. Instead, I stood there, my hands clenched, realizing that he was offering me a warped form of admiration. The kind that expects gratitude. "What do you want?" I asked. He looked at me with calm certainty. "To finish the story," he said. "To see if you'll keep playing the supporting role in your own life." I left the building feeling as though the city itself had tilted. The streets of Belltown, glossy with rain, looked like surfaces waiting to reflect a face I could no longer trust. Over the next month, the situation tightened like a noose made of small incidents. A colleague forwarded me a message from a recruiter offering me an exciting new principal role at a boutique firm in Portland. The recruiter referenced a conversation I had had with them at a private dinner. I had never met them. My mother called one evening, her voice anxious. "Elena, are you moving to San Francisco?" she asked. "A woman from your cousin's office said she saw you on stage there. She said you looked different." The word different made my stomach lurch. I started carrying my passport in my bag, not because I planned to leave, but because I felt a primitive need for proof of myself. I changed passwords. I enabled security features. I audited my online footprint until it felt like scraping skin. None of it touched the real problem, which was that he was not living in my accounts. He was living in my reputation. The power shift happened at my firm in a way that was almost invisible. Graham stopped inviting me to high-level meetings. He framed it as reducing stress, protecting me. But what it did was remove me from rooms where decisions were made. The very rooms I had been trying to enter for years. One afternoon, I overheard two junior designers whispering in the kitchenette. "Do you think it's her?" one asked. "I don't know," the other said. "I mean, she looks like her, but I heard she's complicated." Complicated. That word again. The one that means dangerous without specifying why. When you're a woman in a professional environment, your reputation does not have to be destroyed to become unusable. It only has to be made uncertain. Nadine pursued an injunction. We gathered evidence: timestamps, emails, forged documents, witness statements from conference staff who remembered me but could not describe anything specific beyond hair color and posture. We requested platform takedowns again, this time with legal backing. For a brief moment, it looked like we were gaining ground. Then, in early autumn, the industry conference happened. It was held in a hotel downtown, the kind with carpeted hallways that swallow footsteps. I had been scheduled for a small breakout session on sustainable housing materials. Nothing glamorous, but a start. Nadine advised me to attend anyway, to show presence, to reclaim space. I arrived early, wearing a simple black dress and a blazer, hair pinned back. I felt strangely exposed, as though walking into my own name required armor. At the registration desk, the volunteer smiled brightly. "Welcome, Elena," she said, reaching for a badge. Then her expression faltered as she glanced at the list. "Oh," she added, "you're the other Elena." The phrase hit like a slap. I watched her hand tremble slightly as she printed my badge with an extra identifier. Elena Markovich, Seattle. As if I were a branch office. I entered the lobby and saw him across the room. Not hiding, not lurking. Standing near a group of investors, laughing softly, holding a drink as if he belonged there more naturally than I did. He looked toward me, and his smile widened with a slow satisfaction that made my skin crawl. The organizers pulled us into a private conference room. The walls were beige, the lighting too bright. It was the kind of room where people sign contracts and deliver bad news. Asked us to verify our identities. We both asked us to verify our identities. We both produced ID. His ID said Ryan Caldwell. Mine said Elena Markovich. The legal representative frowned. "Then why," she asked, "is your name, Ms. Markovich, being used in association with Mr. Caldwell's professional engagements?" He responded smoothly. "Because I collaborate with her," he said. "I credit her publicly because she deserves it." I stared at him, stunned by the audacity of framing his theft as generosity. One sponsor, a man in a gray suit whose face suggested he had never been denied anything he wanted, looked at me with irritation. "So, are you saying," he asked, "that your colleague here is lying?" I heard the trap in his question. If I called Ryan a liar, I sounded unstable. If I accepted the premise of collaboration, I legitimized him. "I'm saying," I replied carefully, "that someone has been impersonating me, and it's affecting my professional standing." Ryan's expression softened into something almost sympathetic. "Elena," he said gently, "you have to understand how this looks. You're under stress. You've been overwhelmed. I've tried to help. I've tried to give you opportunities you were too anxious to take." The room shifted. I felt it, the way perception can tilt in an instant based on tone rather than facts. He sounded reasonable. I sounded defensive. For a moment, I understood why con artists succeed. They don't have to outsmart everyone. They only have to offer the simplest narrative at the exact moment others want to believe it. Then the security staff member spoke quietly. "We checked," he said. "Mr. Caldwell is registered as a speaker under Ms. Markovich's name. He submitted her headshot, but his hotel room is in his own name." The legal representative's eyes narrowed. "So you acknowledge submitting her headshot?" Ryan did not flinch. "I submitted the headshot of the person whose work we were presenting," he said. "That's not fraud. That's attribution." It was a linguistic trick, a way of dressing theft in the language of respect. The meeting ended without resolution. The organizers asked Ryan to leave. He did, calmly, without protest, as if confident that the impression he had planted would remain even after he exited. Afterward, as I sat alone in a hallway chair, trying not to shake, Nadine called me. I told her what happened. She listened, then said quietly, "He's trying to fold you into his story until you can't separate yourself from him without sounding irrational." I stared at the patterned carpet, my mind hollowed by exhaustion. "How do you fight that?" I asked. "You keep showing up," she replied. "You refuse to disappear." The simplest advice, and the hardest. That night, back in my apartment, I opened my laptop and typed my name into search engines until my eyes burned. Results populated with his posts, his interviews, his thought leadership. In some places, it was unclear whether Elena Markovich was a real architect or a brand he had invented. I realized that he had not stolen my identity to take my life away. He had stolen it to build his own life with my credibility as its foundation. And in doing so, he had forced me into a cruel choice: either retreat into invisibility for safety, or step into visibility to reclaim myself. That is the moment something inside me changed. The next morning, I emailed the magazine that had been spoofed and told them the truth, attaching evidence. I wrote to conference organizers and offered to speak publicly about professional impersonation and reputational manipulation, framing it not as a personal scandal, but as a structural vulnerability in how industries grant authority. It felt risky. It felt humiliating. It also felt like movement. Over the following weeks, Nadine's legal pressure began to bite. A platform finally removed his account permanently after repeated violations. A conference issued a statement clarifying that I had not been the keynote speaker. A developer apologized for believing forged documents and withdrew their complaint to my firm. It was not a victory. It was repair work. Slow, imperfect, exhausting. Ryan did not disappear immediately. He pivoted, tried to rebrand, tried to claim he had been misunderstood. But scrutiny attracted more scrutiny. People began noticing inconsistencies in his resume beyond me. Old employers denied knowing him. A university listed in his education history had no record. His smooth confidence could not withstand sustained attention. He left Seattle quietly, according to a mutual acquaintance who had once shared a table with him at a fundraiser. "He's going to Austin," the acquaintance said with casual disbelief. "He says Seattle was too small for his vision." Too small. As if the city were the limitation, not his hunger. My firm, however, did not recover with me. Graham called me into his office one final time, and his expression carried a polished regret that felt rehearsed. He spoke about reputational risk, client confidence, internal cohesion. He did not accuse me of wrongdoing, but he did not defend me either. The implication was clear. My presence had become inconvenient, a variable they could not control. I resigned 2 months later. People congratulated me on choosing myself, as if it had been empowering rather than forced. I smiled, thanked them, and went home to an apartment that felt both too quiet and too exposed. Starting my own practice was not glamorous. It was paperwork, budgets, and long nights staring at spreadsheets with a fear I had not felt in years. Yet, for the first time, the work felt undeniably mine. And I began saying yes. Not because I wanted to prove Ryan wrong, but because I could no longer tolerate living as if my own ambition were something shameful. I accepted a speaking invitation at a small university north of the city. I stood on a stage with harsh lighting and a simple microphone, and I spoke about sustainability, but also about visibility, about how easily authority can be fabricated when people care more about narrative than substance. Afterward, a young woman approached me, her eyes bright with nervous excitement. "I looked you up online," she said. "You're the one who had that thing happen, right? The impersonation?" I felt my body tense, expecting pity. Instead, she added, "It's terrifying, but also, you didn't vanish. You're still here." I nodded, and the weight behind my ribs shifted slightly, as if something had loosened. Months later, I received an email from an unfamiliar address. The subject line contained only my name. I stared at it for a full minute before opening it. The message was short, almost clinical. "You're doing it now. You're finally doing it." No signature, no threat, no apology. My hands went cold anyway. I forwarded it to Nadine, who advised me to document it but not respond. Still, the message lodged inside my mind like a splinter, because it carried the final, morally uncomfortable truth that I did not want to face. He had violated my identity, but he had also exposed how much of it I had been withholding from myself. I did not forgive him. I still do not. What he did was invasive and calculated, a form of psychological theft that left me doubting not only how others perceived me, but how I perceived myself. Yet I also cannot pretend that his perfect version of me was purely fiction. It was a distortion built from real materials, my skills, my ideas, my unspoken desires. He did not invent my ambition. He weaponized it. Seattle continues to reinvent itself in glass and steel. The rain still polishes the sidewalks into mirrors. New buildings rise where old ones stood, as if the city is constantly editing its own narrative. I am more guarded now, more selective about what I reveal and to whom. I keep my social media sparse. I separate my personal life from my professional branding with an almost obsessive discipline. I do not hand strangers the interior blueprints of my frustration anymore. But I also move through my career with a confidence that once felt inaccessible. Sometimes, late at night, when the skyline reflects in the black water of the Sound and the city looks like a promise that might be broken, I think about the thin line between theft and transformation. I think about how easily we confuse visibility with legitimacy, charisma with authority, narrative with truth. He stole my name in order to live the life he believed I deserved. And in the process, he forced me to confront the unsettling possibility that I had been the one withholding it from myself. That ambiguity remains the most disturbing part of all, because it means the story cannot end cleanly. It means I cannot place all blame outside myself and move on with moral comfort. It means I have to live with the fact that a stranger built a better version of me first, and that once you have seen that version, you can never fully unsee it. Identity, I learned, is not only what you are, it is also what people will accept as plausible. And in a world that rewards plausibility over truth, the most dangerous person is not the one who wants to destroy you. It is the one who wants to improve you. Because improvement can look like admiration until you realize it is control. I still design buildings meant to withstand erosion and rising tides. I still talk about resilience as if it is a measurable quality, something you can engineer into materials and structure. But now I know resilience is also psychological, and it is often forged in the humiliating space between who you are and who someone else decides you should be. He stole my identity to build the perfect life I always wanted. And the last thing, I have to admit, the thing that makes my stomach tighten even as I write it, is that the life I live now, more visible, more decisive, more mine, looks unsettlingly similar to the one he constructed first. Not because he gave it to me, but because he forced me to see I had it in me all along. And once a truth like that is exposed, you can't go back to living as if you didn't know it.